Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to talk about the main differences between the Waite-Smith Tarot and the Thoth deck. And this is like a part 2 of a video that I did quite a while ago that was called the RWS Vs Thoth deck. So this is going to be a part 2 to that video, and for people who are interested, that video is on my Thoth Tarot deck playlist. So for people who might like to watch that video as well, you can find that video there for part 1. So what I'm going to talk about today, as I'm showing the cards of the two decks, and particularly the major arcana cards, I want to talk about the differences this time from a perspective of the different approach of the two creators of the decks and the different philosophies that influence the creation of the decks, because it's particularly to do with those different philosophies of the two very different people that particularly made these two decks so different. So the first video talked about the differences between the personalities of the two very different creators, being Arthur Waite and Aleister Crowley. But this video is going to be more about the approach, why the approach and the ideas and philosophies influenced the symbols on the cards and even the art styles. So if I start with the Magician cards, here is the Magician from the Waite deck, and if you compare this to the Magician of the Thoth deck, the Thoth deck, the Thoth deck is showing the god Mercury, also known as Hermes, and is also the Egyptian Thoth, which is why it's called the Thoth deck. And if you compare that to the Magician from the Waite Tarot, very different. This is not particularly showing the god Mercury, even though the planet Mercury is associated with both of these cards with the Golden Dawn influence. The Waite Magician card has a more Christ-like appearance. It's very reminiscent of a Jesus image, even the garments on the Magician. And if I talk about this in particular, it kind of summarises the differences between the two decks. Arthur Waite was a Christian mystic, and he was brought up Catholic, and he had a particularly Christian attitude towards Kabbalah. So this Waite deck is really a Christian Kabbalah deck, even though Waite was still influenced by the Golden Dawn. By the time his deck was created in about 1910, he was far more interested and influenced by Christian thought, and to the extent that about 3 years after the Waite deck was created, he formed his own order called the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross. And it was a particularly Rosicrucian and Christian Kabbalah type of order. Whereas the Thoth deck was always very much a Hermetic Kabbalah deck. By the time Crowley created this deck with Frieda Harris, he had left the Golden Dawn, but the Golden Dawn teachings never really left him. So the Thoth deck, the Crowley deck, is more about Hermetic Kabbalah, and it also has an Egyptian feel as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But if you just compare these two cards in particular, you can really see the Christian influence in the Magician card. And I'll show the other cards too that have a particularly Christian feel compared with the Hermetic and Egyptian feel that the Thoth deck has. And I suppose another thing to add too is by the time this Crowley deck or Thoth deck was created, Aleister Crowley had taken over the OTO, which was the Ordo Templi Orientis. He had taken over the leadership of that order because the previous founder, Theodore Roos, had retired. So Aleister Crowley had already taken over the OTO by the time his deck was created. And Crowley had also formulated his ideas of Thelema, which was his spiritual philosophy, which was founded on a trip to Egypt that he had taken many years before. So they're very different decks with different symbolism, different images, not only because of the artwork, but because of the philosophy and the ideas of the creators behind these two decks. So there's the two different Magician cards. Then when we go to the High Priestess card and compare this with the Thoth deck, I think it's pretty easy to see with the High Priestess card, it's got a very Virgin Mary kind of image. And being raised Catholic myself, I automatically recognised these things when I first saw the Waite deck. And it was a bit of a puzzle at first because it took me quite a long time to do my own research and find out why the Waite deck particularly has Christian type of images. So this High Priestess has quite a Virgin Mary type of feel, especially with the use of the blue cloak. So the High Priestess, in comparison to the Crowley High Priestess, the Crowley High Priestess is based on the goddess Diana with the moon, because both of these cards are associated with the moon and the Golden Dawn. So those images are very different too. So if you consider the Magician card being quite like a Christ image and the High Priestess quite like the Virgin Mary image, and then again compare this with the High Priestess Goddess Diana card, it's quite different. And the Goddess Diana has an Egyptian look here too. because the Egyptian esoteric philosophies were very important to Crowley. So those two cards are quite different. Now for the Hierophant, it's very, very Catholic Church image with the Pope. And the Crowley Hierophant is quite different. It has a more pagan look, or a Babylonian look. It has a more earthy look because it has the Taurus the Bull association here, because the card is associated with Taurus. So with the Crowley Hierophant, you can see more of the earth connection, where the Hierophant is an ancient symbol from ancient Greece actually, and it probably had a connection with Babylon before that, with the Babylonian high priests. And the Hierophant is associated with the connection between heaven and earth, being a mediator between heaven and earth. And you can see that more in this card, even though the Catholic Church and the Pope idea represents a similar thing. There's more of an emphasis on hierarchy in this card than the Hierophant, the ancient Hierophant in the Thoth deck. So they're quite different as well. Then we get to the Lover's card, and the Lover's card has a very biblical image of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And the Lover's card is different to that with the Thoth deck. The Thoth deck, Lovers, has a more alchemical connection between the polarities of gender and of race, and the blending of those two things, or at this point the coming together of the first alchemical process, the joining of those differences. So you have quite a different image here too, and it's all because of the different approaches and the different philosophies that the two creators had. So very different Lovers cards as well. Now for the Temperance card, very different again. This is representing the Holy Guardian Angel for Waite, the Temperance card. And you compare this to the card of the Thoth, which is representing alchemy itself, alchemical and metaphysical change. And it was actually called art instead of temperance in the Thoth deck. This is a very alchemical card. It's representing the metaphysical change that takes place at the point of deep alchemical change. And this card is the Holy Guardian Angel. Quite a different meaning and quite a different approach. So very different cards yet again. Then we come to the Moon card, everybody knows this card. Moon card of the Thoth deck. Very different, very Egyptian feel in the Thoth card. The scarab beetle instead of a crayfish. So the meanings behind the two cards quite different. There are similarities as well, but I want to point out the differences in this video to highlight the very different approach and philosophies that each of the creators had, and why the symbolism is so different in the cards because of that. Because both Waite and Crowley directed their artists to create what they wanted represented in their tarots. Even though Waite allowed more freedom to Pamela Coleman Smith, the Thoth deck was very supervised and monitored by Crowley for his deck. He made sketches and drawings of his own, to direct Lady Freda Harris, in how he wanted the meaning to be conveyed in the cards. So very different moon cards. We come to another quite different Judgment, which just has a very Christian biblical tone to the judgment of the last day, which is in the Christian Gospels. And the Thoth deck has the Eon card, which is to do with the new age and the new era that Crowley felt or believed was imminent and on the way. And this is the Egyptian god Horus, and Crowley believed that it was going to be the age of Horus, the divine child. It's quite different to the judgment card of the Waite deck, because this card has very Christian and biblical associations. And the last example I want to talk about for today is the Ace of Cups card. This is a very Catholic image. It's representing the entry of spirit into matter. It has a very Catholic belief association. And if you compare that to the Ace of Cups card with the Thoth deck, very different approach. It's even showing in the Waite Ace of Cups card the host that is associated with communion. With the Catholic belief. So in another way, these two cards can summarise the deck as much as the Magician cards. These cards also summarise the differences with the two decks as well. Two decks that had a basis with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, but two members who went in very different directions. Arthur Waite going in the direction of Christian Kabbalah and Rosicrucianism, and Crowley going into or staying with Hermetic Kabbalah, creating Thelema, his spiritual philosophy, taking over the OTO, and Waite founding the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross. So those two cards particularly summarise the differences with the two decks. And of course the Crowley Thoth deck is a non-scenic pip deck, because that is in keeping with the traditional Hermetic Kabbalah idea, where only pip, non-scenic pip cards were used. And Waite went in a totally different direction with these scenic pip, the rest of the scenic pip cards. So that is my summary of the main differences from a philosophical and idea point of view of the two creators of each of these decks and why they are so different, and why they will always be very different decks, but for the reasons of the very different approaches and beliefs of the two creators of the decks. So thanks for watching. Bye for now.